Well, hey everybody, welcome back. Here we are at the Red Barn, and yeah, it's the Red Barn. Been a while since we've been outside, and I just wanted to remind everybody, yeah, it's still red. And oh my God, look at the big gaping hole where the 914-6 used to be. Boy, it's a major relief to have that thing out of here. It was a fun project, but nerve-wracking to work on something that nice. So it made it out of here totally unscathed, and that was a happy thing. The owner seems very pleased with the work that was done. And now we're back on the 914 Ferrari. But before we jump in, I wanted to thank everybody for the comments and questions that I've been getting lately. A lot of good suggestions from you guys, and I really appreciate it. Please think about subscribing if you haven't. It's just a click of that button right there, and it does help out the channel. Leave me a comment, leave me a question, and I'm pretty good at responding. There's not so many people that I can't get back to most of you, and it's just fun interacting with you. So enough of that, let's get back to business. Okay, we're back at it, and I think I got some good news. What I've done is I've taken the cable with the longest housing, which originally was for the side-to-side movement. You can see here, this is the fore-aft shift, and the way the bracketry works, this is the fore-aft location for the cable end, and you can see on the side-to-side, it's actually farther back. So I took the cable originally designed for this position, put it into the position that needs the shortest cable housing length, and looky there, with nice amount of flex, it fits. Now, let me show you what's going on under here. The transmission's in neutral, and now the shifter's in neutral, and you can see there's a gap there, and you might think, oh, you got to get a new cable because of that length difference. But actually, I don't want to have to deal with every time I want to do a fine adjustment. Yeah, I could do it back here, but that's an unclip, and I don't know. I just like the idea of a different way of doing that. And what I actually prefer is the setup that's in the LS car. Let's go look at that. And what's in the LS car is the same, only different. The transmission's out of the car right now. That's why this is just flopping around. But here you can see, this is a numeric shifter, but what I like about it is it's got this turnbuckle system in it. So there's a regular thread and a reverse thread, and you can pop, loosen these two lock nuts, and by adjusting this, you can change the dimensions of these cables without doing anything else, which makes it super easy to get things adjusted. But that's what I think solves a couple of problems for me. So here's what we're gonna do. But until I get a turnbuckle, I wanted to do a proof of concept to make sure the shifter would actually work. So I just got one of these coupling nuts and cut the head off a bolt. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and assemble this so that it just ties that, bridges that distance. And I can at least test out the shifter. All right, and so what you saw was I just butted those two standard thread connections together, if you will, the cable end and that cutoff bolt, and just threaded this coupling nut on there. So this isn't adjustable, right? It's just tying them together, but looky there. It shifts. It shifts. So I just came up. If I replace that with a turnbuckle, and that's going to be a simple matter of just making up a little, regular threaded stud that transitions to a reverse thread, and then I can get a regular turnbuckle fitting, size it to whatever size it needs to be to make that work, and I can use that cable. Woohoo! So let's go work up a little turnbuckle thingy. But I got to show you this part because this is super cool. So check this out. Gated shifter and a 914. How cool is that? And so here I am. I can make noises like 9,000 RPM and shift through the gears, but I'm not really shifting through the gears. I'm just moving it between third and fourth. But there's apparently a thing with Ferrari gated shifters, and that is the noise they make. And it works apparently something like this. Now, I'm a total know-nothing about Ferrari stuff, but I understand that it's also echoey in here. You can barely hear it. But what happens is the shift lever, actually contacts the gate, and it makes a click noise. Hear it? And so when you shift the car, and again, noise, echoey, and all the other stuff, but it hits the gate and it clicks. It does it. So, like I said, man, I just work here. It makes the click. All right, so I think what that means is I'm gonna go work up a little turnbuckle assembly. All right, now let's talk super boring. So what I've got is a bit of left-hand thread here. I always get this backwards. Regular thread, backwards thread. And all I've done is cut a little piece. Got a couple nuts to help hold them at the same height, and a little block to hold them at the same distance, so they're kind of squared to each other. And I'm gonna go ahead and weld those together and make myself a little thread direction changer. So there we go. You saw my friend welding distortion create a little bit of a problem there at the beginning where I had to realign this thing. But now I have a thread reversing junction. And now what you're seeing is I've got it mocked up. Let's take you around back here. So this is what I call the fore aft. This is the move between, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, going fore and aft with the shifter, and this is the side-to-side movement. There's the reverse plane, there's first and second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth kind of a thing. So the fore aft, we can use this cable for fore aft. But I'm doing now is I've got it in here in this position, clipped, kind of mediumly adjusted to where it needs to be. So with that in position and nicely relaxed and routed, what I'm doing here is I'm putting this fitting in a midway point and then just measuring the gap between that shoulder place and where it needs to contact. And then what you can see here is this is the fitting that goes on the side-to-side movement that happens when you go side to side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it into reverse, and you can barely see this component peeking out from underneath, and that's where this goes on. So you can see that in terms of adjusting this cable, there's just a quick little through bolt here that I can pop off, and I can adjust this to get the fine tuning length. So I'm not going to worry about a turnbuckle here. And here's the good news. With this cable pulled back at about 2.5 inches, you can sort of see that that's going to allow me to get into here. So I'll have enough cable housing distance, and I won't need a turnbuckle, and the cable should work. So there we go. That is that. Oh, and one other thing while we're in here. Now that I've had these cables in here and I can see that, they're reasonably stiff. They move, you can bend them, but they're pretty stiff. This whole super duper cool idea of a tilting slide forward shift console, that is gonna go away. And as it turns out, I prefer, this sounds extraordinarily convenient given that I don't think the tilting thing's gonna work, but having sat in the car and played with it and looked at it for the past couple months, I actually think it looks best flat. So believe it or not, or believe me or not, your choice, I am gonna end up doing away with this whole adjustable console and just make a mount that holds this thing flat in the position that it's currently sitting. So we will be, in neutral, we'll be nice and even with the steering wheel, and that's where that console is going to be. But the good news is that gives me, it simplifies things greatly. I can come up with an actual console frame that can hold other goodies if I so choose, and these are just, this will be easy enough to knock these little tabs off. But yeah, it's going to be a single position shifter, and I think that's going to simplify things, and it probably wasn't going to work anyway with the stiffness of these cables. So I'm going to have a call probably later this afternoon with control cables, give them all these measurements, and take some pictures, and they say that it should work. So I'm only going to need to get one cable. Yay! So it's only a half a do-over. Oh, one other thing that happened. I got a call from a buddy, and he says, hey, there's somebody selling a bunch of Porsche stuff near you. And I went up and rummaged around. Long story short, there were 4 axles just chucked in this pile outside under a shelving unit with 108 millimeter stub axles. So anyway, I've got my stub axles. Now, the other thing that's happened is you've heard me mention our good friend Chris Foley at Tangerine Racing, and I contacted him and said, hey, you wouldn't have to have a set of 108 millimeter stub axles, would you? And he said, well, I actually do. I have a set of trailing arms on my race car that have 108 millimeter stub axles in it, and they're already converted to 5-lug, and better than that, they've been de-cambered. The trailing arms have been de-cambered. Now, this is going to get a bit technical, but I think some of you 914 folks will appreciate this. You can see these trailing arms that came with the car have been plated. You can see there's an overplate right here that down and around the corner. This is the 914-6 GT trailing arm reinforcement kit. And, you know, everybody's got an opinion. I'm just another guy with an opinion, but I don't like it. It doesn't really change the nature of the trailing arms. And if you look at what's going on with these things, yes, you've made a box that's stiffer, but anyway, what Chris does, which I like a lot better, and I'll show you why. This is a trailing arm off a friend of mine's car. And you can tell something ain't right. So this is kind of the normal position that it's in on the car. And yeah, I got to watch this happen. I saw this happen in my rearview mirror, and nothing's quite as frightening as watching your friend go off the road. The good news is he is completely unscathed, not a scratch on him. The car, not so much, but he is 100% okay. But what I want to point out is, look where this bent. It bent right halfway through the length of that arm because it's a big open box. And there's nothing preventing it from twisting right there. That is the weak area in this arm. And yeah, that stiffening kit that you just saw may have helped. Well, it would have helped, but I'm going to take you and show you what the LS car has on it. So these are Chris Foley Tangerine Racing reinforced trailing arms. And you see that weld in the suspiciously similar location to where that other trailing arm on the crashed car got bent? What Chris does is he cuts the trailing arms in half right there and plates that at the weak spot. So it's way less weight, and it addresses one of the key areas where these things aren't strong. And then if you take a close look up there, you can see that he's added a gusset, a big, you know, triangulated 3-dimensional gusset that wraps around the trailing arm top to bottom and heads out to the casing for the pivot shaft of the trailing arm. So triangulated, plated, twist resistant, resistant to side movement for cornering loads as well. Less weight too. We're back on the Ferrari car, and you can see there's no reinforcement, no more triangulation between that factory wide spot, and I'm talking right here, and that arm there, right? This is a big honking lever arm, and it's trying to bend this way too under side loads. So triangulating it up to the pivot axle area is another great idea. So I like Chris's approach better than the traditional GT reinforcement approach. And now you're saying, wait, you said the term de-cambered. So whoop-de-doo, de-cambered trailing arms, what's the big deal? So the big deal is that the way that the trailing arm functions is, yes, it controls rear wheel movement, and as it travels, the rear wheel gains camber and it also gains tow. And so when you lower these cars, you're putting things into a position where trailing arm, all things being equal, the trailing arm's in a position of adding more camber than you might otherwise want. And it's probably going to be hard to show you, but if you look in there where the trailing arm mount, this is the pivot mount, the way you control camber in these things is you insert shims in there, and that drops the outside part of the trailing arm mount, and that obviously changes the camber. So as you lower the car, in order to get it back to the camber you might want, you may end up having to add more shims than you might want. Anyway, also the lower you get the car, you're putting it into a range of change of toe that's not as ideal as the standard ride height. So when Chris talks about decambering trailing arms, what's happening is when he cuts them in half and puts that plate across them to close those two boxes or make the two boxes out of the one box, he's adding a bit of a twist to decamber the back half of the trailing arm so that when it's in the lowered position, it's got more optimal camber. And as I understand it, it also keeps it in the more optimal toe change range as the trailing arm is traveling. So that's the whoop-de-doo. And Chris's decambered trailing arms, they're on the way and they're going on this car. So we're all set. Those should be here soon. And we will have the ability to get back to shifter cables, trailing arms, stub axles, custom length axles. We should start to make some pretty good progress here in a little bit. So I think that's going to do it for this episode. I appreciate you guys watching. I really appreciate your comments and questions. Please keep those coming. And everybody be safe, take care, and we'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.